On September 9, 2025, Nepal was thrust into an unprecedented crisis that would shake the very foundations of the nation. The country awoke to shocking news. Both Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli and President Ramchandra Pudel had resigned from their posts, leaving the highest offices in the land suddenly vacant. Their abrupt departure sent shockwaves through the capital and beyond, plunging Nepal into a dangerous power vacuum. For the first time in decades, the nation found itself without a clear leader or direction. The resignations were not isolated acts, but a direct response to a massive people's movement that had erupted across the country, overwhelming the government's ability to maintain control. In the heart of Kathmandu, the streets pulsed with the energy of protest. Young people, especially from Generation Z, led the charge, their voices echoing through the city as they demanded accountability and a new vision for Nepal's future. With the government in disarray, essential services ground to a halt. Families gathered around televisions, anxiously watching the news, while public spaces filled with uncertainty and fear. The absence of leadership left millions of citizens unsure of what would come next. Political parties, long mired in infighting and power struggles, were paralyzed. Their offices stood shuttered, their leaders conspicuously absent, as the old political order seemed to collapse overnight. The resignations exposed a deeper, festering crisis of trust between the people and their leaders. Citizens vented their anger by tearing down political posters and banners, making it clear that their frustration ran far deeper than any single administration. The people's rejection was not limited to two individuals. It was a sweeping condemnation of the entire political establishment. Effigies of politicians burned in the streets, and anti-government placards filled the air. As night fell, chaos threatened to engulf Kathmandu. Clashes between protesters and police intensified, vehicles were overturned, and fires burned in the streets. The specter of anarchy loomed large, and the nation teetered on the edge of a perilous moment in its history. Under uncertain skies, the Nepalese flag fluttered, a symbol of hope and resilience, but also of a country at a crossroads. The future was clouded, and the path ahead was anything but clear. The old guard had fallen, their portraits removed from the walls of power, but no new leadership had yet emerged to fill the void. The political vacuum was not just a constitutional dilemma, it was a reflection of a society in crisis, questioning the very foundations of its democracy and governance. As dusk settled over Kathmandu, the city seemed suspended in time. People wandered the streets, searching for answers, for leadership, for hope. The nation was truly adrift, with no clear path forward. Yet, amid the uncertainty, a new generation rose up. The youth, undeterred by the chaos, continued to chant for change, gathering in city squares and demanding a future they could believe in. The crisis marked a turning point for Nepal, a moment fraught with danger, but also alive with the possibility of renewal. As the sun rose over Kathmandu, the nation stood at the threshold of a new, uncertain chapter, its people determined to shape what would come next. The protests were ignited in the digital world, led by Generation Z. This new generation, born into a world of connectivity, used their phones not just for entertainment, but as powerful tools for activism. Their voices, amplified by technology, quickly turned online frustration into real-world action, showing how digital spaces can spark tangible change. The government's decision to ban social media platforms like WhatsApp and WeChat was the spark. Overnight, the digital lifelines of millions were cut off, leaving many feeling silenced and isolated. For a generation that relies on these platforms for news, connection, and self-expression, the ban felt like a direct attack on their freedom. For young Nepalis, this was an act of oppression, cutting them off from the world. It wasn't just about losing access to apps, it was about losing their voice, their ability to organize, and their sense of belonging in a global community. The sense of injustice ran deep, fueling a determination to push back. The core of the protest was against systemic corruption and nepotism. Young people saw how opportunities were hoarded by a privileged few, while the majority struggled. They were tired of seeing the same faces in power, and demanded a system where talent and hard work mattered more than family connections. The youth were frustrated by the lavish lifestyles of the political elite's children. Expensive cars, exclusive parties, and foreign education stood in stark contrast to the daily realities faced by ordinary Nepalis. This glaring inequality became a rallying point, uniting young people from all backgrounds. Slogans like KP Chor, Desh Chad captured the movement's anger. These chants echoed through the streets and across social media, expressing a collective frustration with leaders who seemed out of touch and unaccountable. The demands were clear: end corruption and establish merit-based governance. Young activists called for transparency, accountability, and a government that truly served its people, not just the powerful few. The movement was decentralized, organized through social media and messaging apps. Without a single leader, it was harder to suppress. Ideas, strategies, and updates spread rapidly, allowing the protest to grow organically and adapt to new challenges. Groups like Hami Nepal played a crucial role in logistics and information. They coordinated supplies, managed communication, and ensured that the movement stayed focused and peaceful, even in the face of adversity. The youth were determined to build a different future, rejecting the status quo. Their creativity and resilience shone through in protest art, music, and speeches, inspiring others to join the cause. They were globally aware and unwilling to accept the failures of the past. By connecting with international movements and sharing their struggle with the world, Nepal's Gen Z showed that their fight for justice was part of a much larger global demand for change. With political leadership absent and the government in disarray, the streets of Kathmandu fell eerily silent. The usual bustle of the capital was replaced by uncertainty and fear, as citizens wondered who, if anyone, was in control. In this vacuum, the Nepal army intervened to restore order, stepping into a role it had long hoped to avoid. The decision was not taken lightly, as the military understood the delicate balance between security and democracy. Led by General Ashok Sigdel, the army's leadership faced immense pressure to act decisively, yet responsibly, knowing the world was watching. Soldiers patrolled the city, imposing a strict curfew to prevent violence and looting. Checkpoints sprang up overnight, and the army's presence became a daily reality for Kathmandu's residents. The sight of armed soldiers on every corner was unsettling for many, but most recognized it was necessary to prevent the city from descending into anarchy. General Sigdel addressed the nation, assuring the public that the army's intervention was only temporary, a measure taken to protect lives and property until civilian authority could be restored. The army's stated goal was clear: to create space for a political solution, not to impose a military one. They facilitated dialogue between rival factions, urging leaders to find common ground. Soldiers were instructed to maintain order without taking sides, a difficult task as tensions simmered and protests continued. The army exercised restraint, knowing that excessive force could alienate the public, while inaction could allow chaos to spread. Every decision was weighed carefully. For many civilians, the army's presence brought a sense of relief, but also served as a stark reminder of how fragile Nepal's democracy had become. The crisis underscored the urgent need for a political answer. Military intervention could only buy time. It could not resolve the deep divisions at the heart of the conflict. The army managed to enforce a temporary calm, but everyone knew this peace was fragile and could not last without real political progress. Citizens voiced their concerns, understanding that military control was not a long-term solution. Many called for a swift return to civilian rule and democratic norms. The army's role was to maintain stability and protect key institutions until a legitimate government could take charge once again. In the end, the intervention was a stopgap measure, a necessary but imperfect response to a deeply political crisis that only true leadership could resolve. Peaceful protests turned violent on September 8th as security forces used live ammunition. The state's violence transformed protesters' anger into uncontainable rage. The Parliament building and Supreme Court were set ablaze by enraged mobs. The destruction was a rejection of the entire establishment. Media houses and political figures' properties were also targeted. The fires symbolized the end of a failed political system. Protesters felt betrayed, having exhausted peaceful means. The escalation left deep scars on the nation's psyche. The digital uprising morphed into a physical insurrection. The path back to civility seemed long and difficult. The violence marked a tragic breakdown of the social contract. The fight for change came at a devastating human cost. The violence on September 8th resulted in at least 19 deaths. These were young citizens who joined the protests with hope. The death toll rose to 72, leaving families shattered. Hospitals were overwhelmed with over 2,000 injured. The casualties were a brutal reminder of the price of change. The youth movement demanded accountability for the violence. The faces of the dead became powerful symbols of sacrifice. The loss created a generation of activists with deep distrust of the state. The human cost will be remembered as the most tragic aspect. The uprising's legacy is marked by profound human suffering. The Gen Z uprising is part of a long history of youth-led movements in Nepal. Past movements like the Jana Andolans ended monarchy and restored democracy. Street protests are seen as a legitimate tool for change. The current movement echoes past struggles against autocracy. However, post-revolution disappointment fueled Gen Z's anger. They were determined to avoid past mistakes and achieve lasting change. The youth drew inspiration from their predecessors' fight for freedom. The movement aimed to build a just and democratic society. Nepal's chaos has significant geopolitical implications for India and China. Both countries vie for influence in Kathmandu, making stability crucial. The ousting of pro-Beijing PM Oli is a setback for China. India seeks stability, wary of unrest spilling over its border. The youth movement rejects foreign influence, demanding national sovereignty. The protests are about good governance, not foreign interests. India and China will carefully calibrate their responses. Both nations aim to build relationships with new leadership. The focus is on avoiding interference in Nepal's internal affairs. The geopolitical stakes are high as Nepal navigates its crisis. Amidst uncertainty, hope emerged with an interim government. Sushila Karki, a respected former Chief Justice, was appointed leader. Her integrity and anti-corruption stance resonated with protesters. Karki's leadership signaled a break from the discredited political class. The interim government's mandate is to restore order and prepare for elections. The goal is to hand power to a democratically elected government. Karki's appointment provided hope, but challenges remain. The interim government must navigate a polarized society. They face pressure from old political parties and high youth expectations. Healing the nation and organizing credible elections is monumental. The path forward is fraught with challenges, but hope persists. The interim government is a transitional bridge to a new beginning. Nepal stands at a critical crossroads, its future unwritten. The youth movement achieved a stunning victory, removing old leadership. Their focus now is on systemic change and new elections. They demand a complete reset of the political system. Youth representation in the new political structure is crucial. Justice for protest victims is non-negotiable. Established parties, though disgraced, remain influential. The interim government must prevent backsliding into chaos. The revolution's success depends on building a new political culture. The Gen Z uprising offers a rare opportunity for transformation. The coming months will determine Nepal's future path. The world watches as Nepal seeks a more just and democratic nation. The youth hold their breath, hoping for lasting change.